The Thanksgiving table was silent for one terrible second after Adrian struck Noah across the face. Noah froze with one hand against his cheek while tears filled his eyes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked at Adrian and then at his mother, Eleanor. Eleanor did not look shocked. She looked satisfied. That was when I understood this was not an accident. My son had been humiliated before, and everyone had learned to pretend it was normal. I walked to Noah and knelt beside him. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, but tears rolled down his face. I pulled him against me and felt his body trembling. Across the table, Adrian finally spoke. "Mom did not mean it to go that far." I turned toward him. "She hit our child, and you are worried about how far she meant to go." Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "Your son was disrespectful. He is 12. He does not deserve to be treated like that. You have always made him too sensitive." Her husband Raymond stared at his plate. Her daughter Valerie looked frightened. Nobody defended Noah. I helped him put on his coat and took his hand. "We are leaving," Eleanor laughed softly. "Running away will not change anything." I stopped at the door. "No, but it may change what happens next." Outside, the cold air hit my face. Noah walked beside me without speaking. When we reached the car, he finally asked Mom, "Why does Grandma hate me?" I had no answer that would not break his heart. So I told him the truth. "She does not get to decide your worth." He nodded and looked through the window. On the drive home, I called my lawyer, Emily. "I need you to investigate the Monroe Family Trust, the trust connected to your husband." "Yes, especially the inheritance promised to Noah." Emily asked why. "Because I think someone has been stealing from it." That evening, Adrian came home alone. He stood near the doorway looking exhausted. "Where is Noah sleeping? I am sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. "Sorry is not enough. You watched her hit him." He lowered his eyes. "I was scared of her." "Yes," I took a breath. "Then you need to decide who your family is." He said nothing. I walked toward the hallway. Behind me, his voice finally broke. "What are you going to do?" I turned around. "I'm going to find out what your mother has been hiding, and this time I will not stay quiet." That night changed everything. I opened my laptop and began reading every document connected to the trust. By midnight, I found the first transfer that made my hands shake. Money belonging to Noah had been moved into an account controlled by Eleanor. I stared at the screen. The slap was no longer the only thing I needed to fight. Something much bigger was waiting beneath it, and I was ready to uncover everything. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I needed to know what Margaret had done with the rest of Ethan's inheritance. Daniel was still asleep in the guest room. I opened my laptop and reviewed every document Emily had sent. The numbers were impossible to ignore. The trust had started with $460,000. Ethan's share should have been about $153,000. Only $12,000 remained. Margaret had taken almost everything. I called Emily. "I have more evidence," she said. "What did you find?" "Bank records showing transfers into Margaret's personal accounts. There were also payments for things that had nothing to do with the children." "Can you prove the money went to her?" "Absolutely. Then we have everything we need." "Not everything." Emily paused. "There is another problem. What Margaret is claiming. Harold changed his mind before he died. She says Ethan was removed because he was not a blood relative. Harold never said that." "I know. That is why I requested his original estate file." Soon another email arrived. Inside was a scanned letter from Harold's attorney. The letter confirmed that Ethan had been deliberately included in the trust. There was no blood requirement. Then I showed Daniel. He stared at the screen without speaking. Finally, he whispered, "My mother lied." "Yes, and she stole from our son." I should have known. I touched his hand. "You cannot change what you did before, but you can decide what you do now." Daniel nodded. "I will help you." That afternoon, we met Emily. She explained that Margaret had 10 days to provide a complete accounting. If she refused, the court could remove her as trustee. Emily also wanted photographs of Ethan's injury and every message Margaret had sent after Thanksgiving. I gave her everything. Then Emily asked one question. "Are you prepared for Margaret to attack you personally?" I already knew the answer. "Yes, she has been doing that for years." Emily smiled slightly. "Then we are ready." That evening, Margaret called. I almost ignored her. Instead, I answered. Her voice was cold. You are destroying this family, I replied calmly. You destroyed the trust, you erased a child from his grandfather's wishes, and you spent his money. She became silent, then she said something that made my stomach turn. Ethan was never supposed to receive anything. I asked why. Because he is not Harold's blood. I looked at Daniel. He had heard every word. He stood and took the phone from my hand. He spoke quietly. He is my family. Margaret laughed bitterly. You will regret choosing them, Daniel answered. Maybe, but I will never regret choosing my son. He ended the call. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I saw something change inside him. Fear was still there, but courage was finally stronger. The next morning, Emily filed the petition. The battle had begun. That battle would change everything, and Margaret still had no idea how much evidence was waiting against her. 3 days after the petition was filed, Daniel received a letter from Margaret. He opened it while sitting at the kitchen table. His face became pale as he read each line. She demanded that he withdraw his support and apologize for embarrassing the family. She also warned him that if he continued helping me, she would cut him out of everything. Daniel folded the letter. For years, those threats had controlled him. I could see the old fear returning. You do not have to answer her tonight, I said. Daniel looked at me. If I stay silent, she will think I'm still afraid. He picked up his phone and called her. Margaret answered immediately. Daniel spoke before she could say anything. I read your letter, then you know what you must do. No. His voice shook, but he continued. I am not withdrawing anything. Margaret became furious. You are choosing a woman over your mother. Daniel answered. I am choosing my wife and my son. There was a long silence. Then Margaret reminded him about his older brother Marcus. She said Marcus had disappeared from the family after marrying Keisha and that Daniel could suffer the same fate. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked calmer. Maybe Marcus was right to leave. Margaret ended the call. Daniel placed the phone on the table. I think I finally understand what happened to him. That evening I called Emily. She told me the court had accepted the petition. The hearing date would be announced soon, but she had discovered something else. Margaret had transferred money from another account connected to the trust. How much? Almost $40,000. My heart sank. Where did it go? Emily said, the record showed payments to a private company owned by someone close to Margaret. She believed the company existed only to hide withdrawals. Can we prove that we are working on it? The next afternoon, Daniel visited Robert. Robert had worked closely with Harold before his death. He had always avoided family arguments, but now he agreed to speak. Harold suspected Margaret might misuse the trust, Robert said. Why did he never stop her? Because he prepared something in secret. Robert looked around before continuing. There may be another trust, a backup arrangement for Ethan. I stared at him. Where is it? Robert said he did not know yet, but he promised to search through Harold's private records. That night, I realized the case was becoming larger than we had imagined. If Harold had created another trust, then Margaret had not controlled everything, and somewhere in those hidden records could be the proof we needed. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt hope. The truth was finally beginning to speak. Margaret would not surrender easily. She had spent years controlling everyone and protecting her secrets. Now the secrets were being uncovered. I promised Ethan that no matter what happened next, we would stand together. Nobody would silence our family again. The following morning, Robert called me before breakfast. I found something he said. My hands tightened around the phone. What did you find? A box belonging to Harold. He left instructions that it should only be opened if Margaret ever tried to control the trust. Where are you? At my house, I drove there with Daniel. Robert was waiting beside an old wooden cabinet. He removed a small locked box and placed it on the table. I had seen Harold use this box many years ago. Robert opened it with a key hidden inside an envelope. There were several documents inside. One was a handwritten letter. Another was a copy of a trust agreement. The last item was a small USB drive. Daniel looked at Robert. What is all this? Robert handed him the letter. Harold wrote that he did not trust Margaret with Ethan's future. He explained that he had created a second protected trust. The amount was $50,000. It was meant only for Ethan's education. My name was written as trustee. I could barely breathe. Margaret cannot touch this money, Robert said. Daniel read the letter again. Why did Dad hide this from everyone? Because he knew Margaret would try to take it. I looked at the USB drive. What is on this? Robert said. Harold had recorded several private conversations before his death. We took the drive to Emily. She listened to the first recording in silence, then Harold's voice filled the room. I know Margaret has been moving money. I have warned her to stop. If she refuses, then these records must be given to my attorney. Daniel covered his face with both hands. His father had known everything. The second recording was even more powerful. Margaret admitted that she had moved money from the grandchildren's accounts. She said nobody would ever discover it. Emily stopped the recording. This changes the entire case. Can it be used in court? Daniel asked. Yes, especially because Harold created the records before his death. I felt tears forming in my eyes. For months I had wondered whether we were fighting a battle we could win. Now we finally had proof. That evening, Daniel returned home and told Ethan the truth about the protected trust. Ethan listened quietly. Does this mean Grandma cannot take my money? Daniel smiled. Not anymore. Ethan hugged him, then he looked at me. Thank you, Mom. I hugged him tightly. You never needed to thank me. You are my son. Later that night, another message arrived from Margaret. She demanded that we meet alone. Emily warned us not to go. Daniel agreed. We had nothing left to hide. The next hearing was only days away. Margaret had built her power on fear and silence, but now the truth was documented, recorded, protected, and ready for court. For the first time, I believed justice might actually be possible. And when morning came, we were ready to face whatever Margaret brought before the judge together. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy gray sky. I woke before everyone else and sat quietly beside the window. For months, I had imagined this moment. Now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. Daniel came into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. Are you ready? I nodded. I am ready. Ethan was staying with Valerie while we attended court. Before leaving, I hugged him tightly. Whatever happens today, remember that none of this is your fault. He smiled and told me he knew. At the courthouse, Emily met us near the entrance. She carried several folders filled with bank records, letters, and recordings. The judge entered the courtroom and everyone stood. Margaret arrived with her attorney. She looked confident. For the first time, I noticed something different in her expression. Fear. The hearing began with Emily presenting the trust documents. She explained that Ethan had been named as a beneficiary and that Margaret had transferred large amounts without proper authorization. Margaret denied everything. Her attorney argued that the transfers were legitimate family expenses. Emily then presented the bank records. One by one, the transactions appeared on the screen. Payments for jewelry, travel, and private bills were shown beside the dates. The judge studied each record carefully, then Emily introduced Harold's letter. Margaret immediately objected. She claimed the document was incomplete, but Robert testified that he had received the box directly from Harold. He explained the instructions Harold had given him. The courtroom became completely silent. Then came the recordings. Harold's voice filled the room. He spoke clearly about his concerns and his decision to protect Ethan. Margaret looked down. Daniel stared straight ahead. When the recording ended, the judge asked whether Margaret had anything to say. She stood slowly. She said Harold had been confused near the end of his life. Daniel finally turned toward her. That is not true. Margaret looked shocked. Daniel continued, Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He trusted Ethan, and you betrayed that trust. Her attorney tried to stop him, but the judge allowed him to continue. Daniel told the court about years of fear. He explained how Margaret controlled every decision and threatened anyone who challenged her. Then he spoke about Marcus. He said Marcus had been pushed away because he refused to obey her. I watched Daniel speak and realized how much courage it had taken. When he finished, he returned to his seat. The judge announced that Margaret would be removed from control of the trust while the court reviewed the remaining evidence. It was not the final decision, but it was enough. Outside the courtroom, Margaret approached us. Her face was no longer confident. She whispered that we had destroyed the family. I answered quietly, No, Eleanor, we only stopped you from destroying our children's future. Then we walked away together. For the first time, nobody followed her, and for the first time we could finally breathe. Truth had finally become impossible to hide. Weeks after the first hearing were filled with paperwork, Emily continued examining every transaction connected to the trust. She discovered that Emma and Tyler had also lost most of their inheritance. Only a small amount remained in their accounts. Their parents were shocked. Margaret had convinced everyone that she was protecting the children. Instead, she had been using their money to support her own lifestyle. Daniel felt ashamed. He said he should have noticed. I reminded him that Margaret had spent his entire life teaching him to fear her. You are not responsible for her choices, I told him, but you are responsible for what you choose now. He nodded. I am choosing differently. A few days later, Emily received the complete accounting from the court investigator. The report confirmed our suspicions Margaret had made unauthorized transfers and failed to keep proper records. The judge scheduled the final hearing. This time we entered the courtroom without fear. Robert brought the original box. Daniel brought the letter, Emily carried the financial report, I brought Ethan. He wanted to hear the decision. Margaret arrived quietly. She no longer looked powerful. Her attorney asked for settlement. They wanted the family to end the case privately. Margaret would return part of the missing money. In exchange, we would stop pursuing further action. I looked at Daniel. He looked at Ethan. Then he looked at me. No, I said. We are not accepting it. Emily nodded. The judge reviewed the evidence. After several hours, the court announced its decision. Margaret was permanently removed as trustee. An independent trustee would manage the remaining funds. The court ordered Margaret to repay the money she had taken. The protected $50,000 trust for Ethan would remain untouched. Emma and Tyler would also receive protection for whatever remained of their inheritance. Ethan squeezed my hand. Is it over? I smiled. The hardest part is over. Daniel leaned toward him. Your grandfather believed in you. Ethan smiled through tears. I wish I could have known him. Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. He would have been proud of you. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stopped. For years, I thought keeping peace meant obeying my mother. Now I know peace means protecting the people you love. I hugged him. Our family had been broken by fear, but truth had given us a chance to rebuild. Months later, we returned to the same house for Thanksgiving. There was no silence. The table was filled with laughter. Ethan sat beside Daniel. Robert told stories about Harold. Emma and Tyler argued over dessert. Everyone seemed happy. I looked around the table. Money had never been the real inheritance. The real inheritance was courage. The courage to speak, the courage to protect a child, and the courage to walk away. Daniel raised his glass to family. Everyone smiled. Thanksgiving finally felt like home. The story had finally ended at last. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more stories. 1 year later, I stood outside the family house and watched Ethan walk toward me. He was older now and carried himself with a confidence I had never seen before. Eleanor had been ordered to repay the money she had taken. Daniel had changed the most. He no longer avoided difficult conversations. He no longer apologized for defending his family. Most importantly, he no longer lived in fear of Eleanor. She had moved away and rarely contacted anyone, but our family had learned an important lesson. Silence does not create peace. Silence only gives injustice more time to grow. That evening, Ethan asked me about Harold. I told him Harold had been complicated, but he had understood one thing clearly. He wanted his grandchildren to have opportunities he had not been given. That was why he created the protected trust. That was why he left the recordings. And that was why his final wishes mattered. Ethan smiled. I wish I could thank him. I think you already did. How by becoming the person he hoped you would become, he hugged me. Daniel joined us a moment late. He looked at us and smiled. Dinner is ready. We walked inside together. There was laughter, there were stories, and there was something even more important. I thought about the woman I had been before Thanksgiving. I had believed keeping quiet would protect my marriage. I had believed avoiding conflict would protect my child. Protecting family sometimes means standing alone. It means asking questions when everyone else stays silent. It means facing people who have controlled you for years. And sometimes it means choosing truth even when truth hurts. Ethan's inheritance had been nearly destroyed, but the greatest thing we recovered was not money. It was our voice. It was Daniel's courage. It was the family we rebuilt after fear tried to tear us apart. Before we left the table, Ethan looked at me. Mom, are we really okay now? I smiled. We are stronger than we were before, he nodded. Then Daniel reached across the table and held my hand. For the first time, I understood that the story had never really been about money. It had been about love, about courage, and about refusing to let fear decide who deserves to be protected. That night, we closed the door together, and this time there was no silence behind it. Only laughter, only family, only peace. We learned to notice the warning signs we had ignored for years. We learned that children should never carry the burden of adults' mistakes. We learned that money can disappear, but trust takes much longer to rebuild. Most of all, we learned that one brave decision can change an entire family. Ethan had once asked why Eleanor hated him. Now he no longer asked that question. He knew her choices were never a reflection of his worth. That difference meant everything always. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more emotional stories.